I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. It is time for starts, sits, and sleepers for week 15 of the fantasy football season. And if you're watching this, you're likely in your fantasy playoffs, so good work to you. And we're going to help you get ready for those playoff games. And I'm going to be joined by Evan Webb today of RealTime Fantasy Sports. Evan, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's crazy that it's already the playoff time, but here we are.
I know. Time flies. It's been a definitely interesting season. Yeah. Last week, a lot of people went down with injury, unfortunately. So, in these playoffs, I always say just get in. Anything can happen because there's a lot of people that don't have the best record that end up winning it all. You just want to get in. You just need the right players to be hot at the right time. So, should be a lot of fun this week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like you said, it's just, get in and then see what happens. I mean, kind of like any sports league in a way, just get in and you have a shot. So
yep, exactly. There's no home field advantage in fantasy football. So you don't have to worry about being a lower seed or any of that stuff. Some leagues do kind of do that every once in a while. They put in points, but not many do that. Regardless, good luck to everybody out there in their playoffs. And we're going to help you get ready and hopefully give you some good plays for this week. So let's jump into this, Evan, and we'll start at the QB position. Who do you like as a start this week at quarterback?
Yeah, this is simply just a don't overthink it pick for me, but Justin Fields. I think he is going up against the Eagles, and I think a lot of people are going to look at that and be like, do I start him, against a good team like the Eagles? But I'm going to say yes, you stick with him just because his ability to run, makes him a must start, I think, and regardless of the opponent. And honestly, the Eagles haven't been particularly great against running quarterbacks either, as they are giving up actually a pretty good chunk of yardage for quarterbacks that run. Currently, they're giving up about 6.5 yards per carry against opposing quarterbacks. So I think this is a great game that sets up for Justin Fields, even though the Eagles are, one of the better opponents out there. I think you're going to look at that and you're going to say, they're 30, the 31st toughest team to score on. I just don't think I think at least going this week with Fields' ability to run, I think he's a must start.
I agree. Don't overthink it. I think Fields has moved into that category just because of his monster rushing totals. He can get it done against any defense, and I agree with that. My start is Dak Prescott with the Dallas Cowboys. So he's been pretty ho-hum much of the year. But the good news is he's actually been fairly consistent. He has at least 18 fantasy points, 6 straight games. He's capable of the big game as well. He has 3 games with 23-plus fantasy points. He has multiple touchdowns, 5 of 6 games. He's been a solid fantasy play much of the year, and I think he's going to have one of those big games this week against Jacksonville. They allowed the 8th most fantasy points of QBs, ranked 28th overall against the pass. So I think Prescott gets it done in this matchup and a good low-end number 1 QB for fantasy teams in week 15. Okay, how about a sit at the QB position, Evan?
Yeah, I got Tua this week as my sit. He is playing a good Bills defense, and he just still kind of looks hurt to me, in my opinion at least. And his accuracy looks a little bit off right now. He was 10 of 28 in last week's game against the Chargers, and just 145 passing yards. He only had 3 rushes as well. And I just think that I would lean towards sitting him right now, especially if you have a quality backup QB, just because I just don't think he looks all the way right now. And, he's going on about 3 weeks in a row now where, he hasn't put up great numbers. So I'd lean towards sitting Tua this week.
You have to wonder if teams get, a game plan that works against him going, because it kind of seems like it's been take away that short pass. That's what he's great at. He's accurate, getting the ball out quick, get it to those great receivers and let them do the work. But they're kind of taking that away now, and he's struggling. He's not completing passes down the field like he did earlier in the year as well. So you just kind of wonder, you get more tape on a guy, and the league figures it out in a hurry. And I think they've kind of figured a few things out with Tua. My sit is Trevor Lawrence. So he's actually been playing very well lately. I think he's taken big steps forward this year in year 2. He has 3 touchdown games, 2 of his last 3. He's playing with confidence, making good decisions. But I don't like his matchup this week. When he's played well, It's been against poor defenses, and when he plays the good defense, he has not played well. Fewer than 16 fantasy points to the Broncos, Texans, and Eagles. Those are three of the best teams against fantasy quarterbacks this year. He gets one of those good defenses this week, too, in Dallas. They allow the fourth fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, second overall against a pass. They allow just 182.4 rushing passing yards per game, I should say. So I think Lawrence could have some struggles in this matchup. I don't think he's quite that plug and play guy just yet like Justin Fields is. All right, let's talk about a sleeper now, QB. Who do you like as maybe an under the radar option this week?
Yeah, I got Mike White from the New York Jets this week. He is dealing with a bit of a rib injury coming off of last week's game, but he's playing the Lions defense, and that's kind of been our thing all year. When anybody plays the Lions, is look out for that guy because he's playing a really bad defense, and the Lions pass rush has been bad, and Mike White does do a pretty good job of getting rid of the ball quickly. And right now, here's a stat for you: the Lions have given up more than 26 fantasy points in 4 of their last 5 games. So I think that's a possibility to keep that going. I don't know if Mike White will get to that 26 mark, but I think that he could have a nice game this week. And this is a really big game for both teams. Kind of a loser leaves town game, in my opinion, just between those two. So I think it's a big game, and Jets are playing at home. So I like Mike White going up against a bad defense.
Yeah, who would have thought that? Both these teams fighting for a playoff spot at this time of the year, but they are. I like White as well. My sleeper is Mac Jones with the New England Patriots. He's been more bad than good this year, but he does have 2 games with 20-plus fantasy points. He's capable of that big game. And the Patriots' running game is beat up right now. Ramondre Stevenson, I don't think he's going to play this week. He has an ankle injury. Damian Harris is also banged up. He could return, but maybe he's limited in the game. So I think Jones might get a few more chances to throw the ball, especially against the Raiders. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, just 29th overall against a pass. They are not good against a pass. And I think Jones is a decent streamer this week in this matchup. I think he could get a few more chances than he normally does. Okay, let's move on to running back now. Evan, who's your start at running back for this week?
Yeah, I'm going with this guy for a second week in a row, and it's Donovan Knight from the New York Jets. As I mentioned with Mike White, they're going up against the Lions defense, which hasn't been great. The Lions defense against the rush has been a little bit better than what it has been against the pass, but it's still not a great defense. And, Donovan Knight last week, 17 rushes for 71 yards and a touchdown. I think this is just one of those you ride the hot hand and you keep him in your lineup.
Yeah, if you were worried about Michael Carter returning, I think it showed last week Knight's the guy in that offense for now, definitely. So I agree. I think he's a solid play once again this week. My start is Brian Robinson with the Washington Commanders. He's really establishing himself as a solid NFL starter. He's playing his best football right now, having 85-plus rushing yards 3 or 4 games. He has double-digit fantasy points 3 of those games as well. He's getting a lot of work. He has at least 13 carries, 7 of 8 games. I think he should play well again this week against the Giants. He just scored 13.1 fantasy points against them his last game out. And New York ranks 29th overall against the run, allowing 149.7 rushing yards per game. So I think Robinson gets it done again this week. I know he doesn't catch passes, but he's getting a lot of carries. He gets goal line work a lot of times as well. So I think he produces well in this matchup. Let's talk about the opposite ends things now, Evan, at the running back spot. How about a sit?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with both Tampa Bay runners. White and Leonard Fournette, I think, are just 2 guys right now that I would lean to sit. I mean, you could maybe make a case for White to stay in your flex position just because he has been getting a little bit more carries than Fournette. But Fournette, I think, is an easy sit right now. He does get the receiving yards a little bit, but right now these 2 are just kind of split in time. And they're going up against a pretty good Bengals defense right now. And the Bengals have been pretty good against good running backs as well. Like Nick Chubb, they held him to 2.2 yards per carry last week. And then 2 weeks ago, they held Derrick Henry to 2.2 yards per carry. So I think that'll stay I think this will be a pretty low scoring game. And I just don't really see White or Fournette breaking out this week.
All right, my sit for this week is Raheem Mostert with the Miami Dolphins. He's done little since returning from his knee injury 2 weeks back. He has 18 carries for just 67 yards his last 2 games. He has double-digit fantasy points just once in his last 6 games. He doesn't get work in the passing game. I know Jeff Wilson's banged up, probably won't play this week, but the Dolphins throwing the ball a ton right now, not really doing much on the ground. Mostert doesn't catch passes, so I just think his ceiling is very low and his floor is low as well. So I avoid him if I have better options, especially against Buffalo this week. They allow their fourth overall against the run, and they've been very good against running backs this year as well when it comes to fantasy numbers. So I would just sit Mostert in this matchup, go with other options if you have them. All right, let's talk about a sleeper now, running back. Who do you like in that category?
I like Chuba Hubbard from Carolina Panthers. He's getting a lot of third down rushes, so he's kind of getting a lot of yardage like within the red zone as well. So, and he also can catch the ball. He's getting some catches as well. And him and Foreman are combining for about 35 rushes per game. And they're playing a pretty bad Steelers team this week. So I like Hubbard as a potential sleeper and to maybe break out a little bit this week.
Panthers, they're going all in on the run. They're running the ball a ton lately. So even though he doesn't start, I think Hubbard's not a bad play as well if you're looking for a flex option. Good call on that one. My sleeper is Cam Akers with the Los Angeles Rams. It's still kind of tough to figure out this Rams backfield, but it seems Akers is the lead for now. 2 straight games. He has scores 2 straight games, double-digit fantasy points each of those games as well. He has at least 12 carries, 3 or 4 games. So I think he's the guy right now. Baker Mayfield should help that offense as well. So I think that is good news for Cam Akers also, taking some of that pressure off him, being able to throw the ball a little bit now, the Rams. So I think Akers does well again this week. They play the Packers. They rank just 30th overall against the run, allowing 154.8 rushing yards per game. So I know a lot of people have been down on Akers much of the year, but right now he's helping fantasy teams a little bit, and I think he could do it again this week in week 15. All right, let's move on to receiver now for week 15. Who do you like as a start this week, Evan?
Yeah, I like Brandon Ayuk from the 49ers. He only did catch 2 targets last week, but he did have 57 yards and a touchdown in those 2 targets. And no Deebo Samuel this week, it doesn't look like, because of the Thursday game for the Niners. So they're playing Seattle, which has been up and down defensively this year. So I like Ayuk as a starter just for the fact that I think he'll be the go-to receiver for the Niners this week.
Yeah, he should get a lot of volume. He's been a great red zone target as well, like you mentioned him scoring last week. My start is Michael Pittman with the Indianapolis Colts. He isn't really having quite the fantasy season owners had hoped, but he really hasn't been all bad, especially when Matt Ryan's been starting for him. He has double-digit fantasy points 4 or 5 games in all but 3 games this year, so he's been pretty consistent. Not off the chart numbers, but pretty good. And he's got a super matchup this week against Minnesota. Minnesota's dead last against the pass. They allow 287.2 passing yards per game. I think Pittman has a lot of success in this matchup, posting big numbers for his fantasy owners. Okay, how about a sit at receiver, Evan?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Juju Smith-Schuster from the Kansas City Chiefs. And this really isn't really a shot at him. It's just the fact that they're playing the Texans. And the Texans have seen the 3rd fewest pass attempts because their defense has just been so horrible against the run. So I think that this is going to be a blowout game, and I could see this being one where that's, pretty out of hand by halftime, or at least by the 3rd quarter. So I just don't think Juju's going to get much action this week, just because I think it's going to be a blowout.
Yeah, game script definitely matters, and they are all banged up on both sides of the ball. So like you said, I think it could be a blowout, and never know what happens in those blowouts. It can impact fantasy numbers in a hurry. All right, my sit is Marquise Brown with the Arizona Cardinals. He's having a pretty big year, but he hasn't been really the same player since returning from injury 2 weeks back. He has fewer than 50 yards each of his last 2 games. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is around now, and he's taken away a lot of targets from him. He's been a decent fantasy play with Hopkins in the lineup, Brown, but he's been pretty quiet in those matchups with Hopkins playing. And they play the Broncos this week. Really good defense. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to receivers. So I think Brown struggles again in this matchup, and he gets held to fewer than 50 yards once again, and is not much of a help to his fantasy owners, unfortunately. All right, let's talk about a sleeper now at receiver. Evan, who do you not? Who do you like as a possible sleeper for this week?
I like Josh Palmer from the Chargers this week. Now he only had 4 receptions for 53 yards last week, but they're playing Tennessee, which has been the worst passing defense this year. And many of the second and third wide receivers that have played against Tennessee have gone off recently, and we saw it last week with Jacksonville. Zay Jones had a big game, so I could kind of see this being a similar script with a guy like Josh Palmer potentially. Even though a lot of those guys are back for the Chargers, I could see Palmer getting some action this week.
Yeah, Palmer still got work last week when both those guys were in the mix. I still think he's a good fantasy play, like you said. All right, my sleeper is Chris Moore. This would have looked a lot better last week if I would have mentioned him as a sleeper because he had a huge game, but I don't think it's a fluke. Nico Collins, Brandon Cooks, they're probably not going to play again. Both of them are hurting. So Moore is really the last guy left for them at receiver. And he had 10 catches for 124 yards on 11 targets. And I think he's going to get a ton of volume again this week. They're playing Kansas City, like you mentioned. I think it's going to be a blowout. Texans are going to be playing from behind, have to throw the ball a lot. So I think the game script bodes really well for Moore to produce big once again. Might not have the same game as last week. Those are huge numbers, but he can do well. Kansas City allows the fourth most fantasy points to receivers as well. So I think Moore is a good play once again this week as a maybe low end number 2 or number 3 fantasy receiver for fantasy owners this week. All right, let's move on to tight end. It's been a frustrating position this year. So let's try to get some right for people this week to help them set their lineups. Who's a start for you at tight end, Evan?
I'm just going to go with a high floor guy and go with David Njoku from the Cleveland Browns. He had 7 receptions for 59 yards and a touchdown last week. And really the only thing I got on him is I just think he's got a higher floor than a lot of the other tight ends right now. So I think if you're maybe leaning not to start him this week, I think don't really think about it. I think start him and
Plus Amari Cooper's hurting. He might not play. Deshaun Watson looked better last week, in my opinion. I think that's good news for Njoku. I think he's a solid play as well. My start is Dawson Knox. He's been one of those frustrating fantasy players at tight end that I talked about when I was introing this position. So, he's kind of hard to trust, but I think he's trending up right now. He tied a season high with 7 targets last week. He has 14 plus fantasy points, 2 of 4 games. He plays the Dolphins. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. Really struggled against a tight end this year. And I think Knox has another one of his good games this week and is a plus for fantasy owners. All right, how about a sit? Somebody that's going to struggle at tight end this week.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Gerald Everett from the Los Angeles Chargers. I think it's just simply because all the receivers are back for the Chargers, and I think he's only going to get short field opportunities, and I think you're just really banking on him to score a touchdown. I think he has a high ceiling, but I think he has a really, really low floor this week. And last week he only had 28 receiving yards. So I think just because of that low floor, I think you're just really banking on him to score a touchdown, and that's really about it. I just don't think he's going to get the yardage.
Yeah, the ultimate boomer bust play, touchdown dependent player.
Yep.
So my sit is it's hard to suggest this, but if you have better options, I really would consider sitting Mark Andrews right now. He's just not getting it done. He has fewer than double-digit fantasy points his last 2 games. Tyler Huntley starting is not really a positive for Andrews. They've been struggling to throw the ball when Huntley's in the lineup. He did have a catch on 2 targets against his opponent this week, the Cleveland Browns, in Week 7, so he went without a catch against the Browns in that game. And the Browns allow the 6th fewest fantasy points at tight ends. Again, it's really hard to sit Andrews, but if you have a better option, a guy with a great matchup who's been playing well lately, I would really consider doing it, even though Andrews has a really high ceiling. I just don't think he's going to have a huge game in this matchup. All right, let's talk about a sleeper now, somebody that could maybe surprise and help fantasy teams at tight end this week.
I'm going with him again, back-to-back weeks. Chigozie Okonkwo. He had a great game last week, so I was right on that, and he had 6 receptions, 45 yards, and a touchdown. He also had a 2-point conversion as well, and he just kind of gets better and better each week, and so he's done a great job. And like I said last week, Ryan Tannehill really likes the big targets, and he's right now 3rd on the team in receptions. So I like riding him as long as you can go with him.
Yeah, who would have thought that Okonwu would be a fantasy winner this year? But he might end up being it. He's played well. He doesn't really look. I talked about it with Logan in the waiver wire video we did, but he doesn't really look like a tight end. He looks more like a receiver playing tight end. So that can create some matchup problems for sure. I like him too going forward. All right, my sleeper is another guy we've talked about a lot. It's Greg Dulcich. He's really, become a big part of the Broncos passing game his rookie season. He has 8 targets each of his last 2 games. I know he hasn't really connected on those targets, but he's getting a lot of looks. I don't really mind if Russell Wilson doesn't play and Brett Rippon plays this week. I still think Dulcich gets the looks. They play Arizona. They've been a target for fantasy owners all year at the tight end position. They've been dreadful against the tight end all year. They allow the most fantasy points at tight ends, and it's by a wide margin. They allow about 31 fantasy points more than the 31st ranked team. So that's a pretty good difference between 32 and 31 at tight end. So I think Dulcich is a good play, even if Wilson misses this game. All right, Evan, those are our starts, sits, and sleepers for this week. Appreciate you joining me as always. Good luck to you in your Week 15 games as well.
Yep, you as well. Good luck to everybody in their playoffs this week.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Logan. Appreciate it. Yep. All right, this has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports. I hope you have a lot of success in Week 15. Like I said, playoffs are starting, so want to see you advance and move on and win big this year. So good luck this week in Week 15, and have a great day. This has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports.